The rain had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the small town of Oakridge in a cold, gray hush. Most people had taken shelter, rushing indoors with umbrellas and coats pulled tightly against their bodies. But one man remained still, sitting on a bench near the corner of Fifth and Maple, soaked, shivering, and invisible. His name was Caleb Brooks, though few knew it. To most passers-by, he was just another homeless man, his face hidden under a weather-worn hoodie, his hands wrapped in duct-taped gloves, and his backpack sagging with everything he owned in the world. But behind those tired eyes was a life that once brimmed with hope, a heart that had known both love and loss, and a soul now teetering on the edge of giving up. Caleb hadn't always been this way. Just 4 years earlier, he had a modest home, a wife who adored him, and a daughter named Lily whose laugh could brighten the darkest of days. He worked at a local hardware store, fixed bikes for kids in his neighborhood, and never thought life would take a drastic turn. But life, as it often does, had other plans. A car crash on a snowy December morning changed everything. His wife, Emily, and little Lily were taken from him in an instant. Caleb survived, but part of him died that day. The grief consumed him slowly, and what began as a few missed days of work turned into weeks, and then months. Eventually, he lost his job. Bills piled up, the house was repossessed, and with no family to turn to, he drifted into the shadows of society. Years passed. People stopped seeing him. He became part of the city's background, just another forgotten face in a world that moved too fast. Until that one rainy afternoon. A young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, hurried down the sidewalk under a bright red umbrella. Her coat was soaked at the edges, and her boots splashed through puddles as she rushed toward the cafe on the corner. Just as she passed the bench, she paused. Her eyes met Caleb's for a brief second. Most people would look away. She didn't. Instead, she walked into the cafe, ordered something, and moments later returned with a paper cup and a small brown bag. "Hi," she said gently, kneeling to Caleb's eye level. "It's cold. I thought you could use something warm." She handed him the cup of coffee and the bag with a freshly baked muffin inside. Caleb looked at her, confused, unsure if he should take it. No one had spoken to him kindly in months. "My name's Grace," she said, smiling. "What's yours?" He hesitated. "See Caleb." "Well, Caleb, I hope this helps a little. I'll be back this way tomorrow. If you're still here, I'd love to talk." She stood up and disappeared into the rain, leaving behind warmth far greater than the coffee in his hands. That night, for the first time in years, Caleb cried, not because of the cold, or hunger, but because someone had seen him. Really seen him. True to her word, Grace returned the next day. And the day after that. She never forced conversation but always brought coffee and asked about his day. Over time, Caleb shared pieces of his life, how he'd once had a family, how he lost everything, how he stopped believing people cared. Grace listened with an open heart. She never pitied him. She just saw a man who had weathered more than most. One afternoon, she said, "I don't want to overstep, but I volunteer at a shelter a few blocks down. They've got open beds this week. You'd be warm, dry, and they've got counselors if you ever feel like talking." Caleb looked at her, unsure. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. What if it was just a temporary fix? What if it ended in disappointment again? But her eyes held sincerity. And so, he said yes. That single decision, fueled by one small act of kindness, set in motion a ripple Caleb could never have imagined. The shelter was more than just a roof. It was a place of healing. The counselors helped Caleb work through the grief he had buried for so long. For weeks, he spoke little. But one night, he told them everything, about Emily, Lily, the crash, and the silence that followed. "I stopped living the day they died," he whispered. "You're still here for a reason," one counselor said gently. "Sometimes, healing begins when we choose to let others help us carry the weight." With Grace's encouragement, Caleb joined a job training program. He was hesitant at first, convinced he had nothing left to offer. But soon, he was fixing bikes again, this time for neighborhood kids through a community outreach program. Each bolt he tightened, each tire he patched, brought back memories of the old days. He laughed again. He began shaving, combing his hair, and standing a little taller. When the shelter helped him secure a part-time job at a repair shop, he cried in the manager's office, not because of the job, but because someone believed in him again. 6 months passed. Caleb saved enough for a small studio apartment. Grace helped him furnish it with second-hand furniture and thrift store finds. She even brought a potted plant for the window. "It needs sunlight and care," she said. "Kind of like people." On the anniversary of his family's death, Caleb didn't sit alone for the first time. He stood at their grave with Grace beside him, holding a bouquet of lilies. The wind whispered through the trees, and he spoke aloud. "I miss you both every day. But I met someone who reminded me that kindness still exists. That people still care. I think you would have liked her." Grace smiled quietly, tears filling her eyes. A year later, Caleb was running his own bike repair stand. Kids waved at him as they passed. Parents trusted him with their family rides. And every Sunday, he volunteered at the same shelter that gave him a second chance. "Why do you keep coming back?" a young man asked him once. Caleb looked out the window and smiled. "Because one day, someone showed me kindness when I had nothing. Just one person. One muffin. One cup of coffee. It changed my life. Now it's my turn." He never told Grace how many nights her small gesture had kept him going. How just knowing someone cared gave him the strength to keep breathing. But one spring afternoon, as they walked past the bench where they first met, Caleb paused. "You saved me," he said softly. "You didn't know it. But you did." Grace looked at him, her eyes wide. "I just gave you coffee," she said, almost whispering. "No," he replied. "You gave me dignity. Hope. A reason to live again." They stood in silence, the wind brushing against their faces. Around them, the world bustled by. But in that moment, two souls stood still, forever connected by one small act of kindness.